Most people never question how electricity actually works in their daily lives. They flip a switch, plug in a device, and expect everything to just work. And at the end of the month, they pay the bill without thinking twice about it. But if you stop for a moment and really think about it, something doesn't quite make sense. We live in a time where technology is becoming more efficient every single year. Devices consume less power, systems improve, and innovation keeps moving forward. So, why does it feel like electricity is becoming more expensive instead of less? It's a strange contradiction. On one hand, we're told that progress makes things better and more efficient. On the other hand, the cost of something as essential as energy keeps rising, and no one really questions why. And once you start asking that question, it opens the door to something much bigger than most people expect. Before we go deeper into this, make sure you subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because topics like this are not something you come across every day, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Also, I'm curious, where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments. It's always interesting to see how many people are starting to question the same things. Now, let's talk about something most people accept without ever really analyzing. Electricity is one of the few things in life that we completely depend on but barely understand. We trust that the system works the way it's supposed to, and we assume there's no alternative. But throughout history, there have been moments where people started to question that assumption. Moments where individuals looked at the system and thought, maybe this isn't the only way. And once that idea enters your mind, it's hard to ignore it. Because what if the way we use energy today isn't the only possible way? Electricity feels invisible, but its impact is everywhere. It powers your home, your phone, your appliances, your entire daily routine. Without it, modern life simply stops. And because it's so essential, most people never stop to question it. They accept it as something fixed, something that can't really be changed. But here's where things start to get interesting. If you look at how other technologies have evolved over time, you'll notice a clear pattern. Things become smaller, faster, cheaper, and more efficient. That's the natural direction of innovation. Think about computers. Decades ago, they were massive machines that cost a fortune. Today, you carry something far more powerful in your pocket. The same happened with communication, transportation, and even food production. So, why doesn't electricity follow the same pattern? Why do we still rely on systems that feel outdated, centralized, and increasingly expensive? The answer isn't simple, but part of it has to do with how energy systems were built from the very beginning. Electricity wasn't just developed as a convenience. It was built as an infrastructure, a network, a system designed to distribute power from a central source to millions of users. And once a system like that is in place, changing it becomes incredibly difficult, not because it's impossible, but because it affects everything connected to it. Now, here's something most people don't think about. When a system becomes this large, it also becomes dependent on consistency, stability, predictability. That means innovation doesn't just need to work. It needs to fit into the existing structure. And if it doesn't, it often gets ignored, delayed, or simply never reaches the public. This doesn't mean there's a conspiracy behind everything. But it does mean that systems tend to resist change, especially when that change could disrupt how they operate. And this is where alternative ideas start to become interesting. Because throughout history, there have always been individuals experimenting with different approaches to energy, not necessarily to replace the system entirely, but to explore what else might be possible. Some of those ideas were ahead of their time, others were incomplete, and some were simply forgotten. But every now and then, one of those ideas resurfaces. And when it does, it makes people stop and think. Because even if it's not perfect, it challenges the assumption that there's only one way to do things. And once that assumption is broken, everything starts to look different. Before we go deeper into this part, there's something worth mentioning. Some people today have started revisiting older energy concepts using simple materials and modern understanding, not as a guaranteed solution, but as a way to explore whether there's something more behind these ideas. If you're curious to see what people are experimenting with, there's a link in the description where you can take a closer look. Now, here's where things start to connect. Once you begin questioning the system, you start noticing patterns. For example, most people believe that energy has to come from large, centralized sources, power plants, grids, massive infrastructures. And while that's true for how things are currently set up, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the only possible way. Because at its core, electricity is just energy in motion, and energy exists everywhere in different forms. The challenge has always been how to capture it, control it, and make it usable. But what if there are methods that don't rely entirely on traditional systems? Not to replace them completely, but to reduce dependence on them. That idea alone changes the perspective. Because instead of thinking I have no choice, it becomes maybe there are options. And once people start exploring options, something interesting happens. They begin to experiment, not on a massive scale, not with complex machinery, but with small, simple setups that allow them to observe how energy behaves. And this is where curiosity turns into action. Some people try small configurations. Others follow guides. Some just test things out of pure interest. And while results can vary, the important part isn't immediate success. It's understanding. Because the more you understand how something works, the more control you gain over it. And that's something the average person rarely experiences when it comes to energy. They consume it, they pay for it, but they don't control it. So even the idea of exploring alternatives becomes powerful, not because it guarantees a specific outcome, but because it changes your relationship with the system. And that shift is what makes people keep looking. At the end of the day, this isn't really just about electricity. It's about something much deeper than that. Because once you start questioning something as fundamental as how energy works, it changes the way you look at everything else around you. Most people go through life accepting systems as they are. They don't question them, not because they don't care, but because they assume those systems are already optimized, already figured out, already the best possible version. But history shows something very different. There have been countless moments where what people believe to be complete or perfect turned out to be just one version of many possibilities. And the only reason those alternatives were discovered was because someone decided to question what everyone else accepted. That's where real change begins. Not with answers, but with questions. And that's exactly what makes this topic so powerful. Because the moment you start asking, is this the only way? You open the door to possibilities that most people never even consider. Now, when it comes to energy, this becomes even more important. Because energy is not just another expense. It's something that affects almost every part of your life. Your comfort, your productivity, your daily routine, even your sense of security. Everything is connected to it. And yet, for something so important, most people have very little control over it. They depend on external systems. They adapt to rising costs. They adjust their behavior to fit within limitations. And over time, that becomes normal. But what if normal isn't the only option? That question alone is enough to shift your entire perspective. Because when you start exploring alternatives, even small ones, you begin to realize something important. Control doesn't always come from replacing a system completely. Sometimes, it comes from understanding it better, from finding ways to interact with it differently, from discovering that there are layers to things that most people never see. And this is where curiosity becomes one of the most valuable tools you can have, because curiosity leads to exploration. Exploration leads to understanding, and understanding leads to better decisions. Now, let's be clear about something. Not every idea you come across will work the way it's described. Not every concept will deliver dramatic results overnight, and not every experiment will lead to a breakthrough. But that doesn't make the process useless. In fact, it's the opposite. Because every time you explore something new, you gain insight. You learn what works, what doesn't, and why. And over time, that builds a level of awareness that most people never reach. That's the real advantage. Not just information, but understanding. Because once you understand something, you're no longer completely dependent on others to define it for you. You can analyze it yourself. You can question it. You can make decisions based on your own perspective. And that's where things start to change. Because instead of feeling like you're stuck within a system, you begin to feel like you have options, even if those options start small. And small changes over time can lead to significant differences. That applies to almost everything in life, energy included. Now, think about this for a moment. If more people started to question how things work, if more people became curious about alternatives, if more people explored ideas instead of dismissing them immediately, what would happen? At the very least, there will be more awareness, more discussion, more innovation, and that alone has a potential to create change. Because change doesn't happen all at once. It starts with individuals thinking differently, acting differently, exploring things that others ignore. And that's exactly what you're doing right now by even watching this. You're stepping outside of the default way of thinking. You're allowing yourself to consider that there might be more to this than what's commonly discussed. And that's powerful, because once you reach that point, it's hard to go back to not questioning things. Now, what you choose to do with this information is entirely up to you. You can ignore it and move on, or you can take a closer look and explore further. Not because you're expecting a guaranteed result, but because you're curious enough to see for yourself. And sometimes that curiosity leads to unexpected discoveries, new perspectives, new ideas, new ways of thinking, and occasionally something more. So if you want to explore some of the ideas people are currently testing and see what they're discovering on their own, you can check the link in the description and take a closer look. No pressure, no assumptions, just an opportunity to see what's out there and decide for yourself what makes sense. Because in the end, the biggest difference isn't between people who know everything and people who don't. It's between those who question and those who never do.